Hi there, I'm so glad you're joining me today. I've been asked to just do a little sort of walk and talk through some of the paste grain papers I've been making. So for those of you that don't know what paste grain is, it's simply using acrylic paint, and into that you mix wallpaper paste. The wallpaper paste will do two things. It will first of all give bulk to your paint so that you have more volume of it, but it doesn't actually dilute the colors. So for instance, it won't make the red into the pink, it will just make it a less intense color. The second thing is, because the wallpaper paste is very moist, it stops your paint from drying on your paper very quickly, so it allows you to play a bit more, and for me that's one of the greatest joys. So simply speaking, if you have already mixed your paint into your wallpaper paste, you could apply it onto your piece of card, which is easier to work with than paper because it's going to get wet, and then use implements such as maybe something like a little spatula and just scrape off some of the color. So that will allow you to create textures and surfaces on your paint. Here, for instance, too, you can see another one, and the beauty of this is that as we've scraped away the paint, you can see how it's gathered in some of these edges, and that almost creates a shadow or a 3D effect. Rather fun. Then you can simply just do something very, very simple. If you wanted to create a nice background, you can take a wide, hard bristled brush, something like a hogshair brush, or even just a household paintbrush, and just simply drag color across. Don't be obsessed with it being smooth and even colored all over the place. You're not printing paper, you're doing handmade designs. Here's another example in a different color. And with this one, I put on a base of yellow ochre, and then I've just dragged in some black over that, so that I've created quite a dark background. But if you're going to mount something on top of that, if you were going to do something in a lighter color, maybe like that, it would actually work really, really well. So even if you have a card, when it's dry and you're not happy with the design you've made, remember that they can always be used as mounts. This one, I took a little sponge roller and simply just mixed a couple of colors together and rolled them in one direction and then in the other direction. And again, a very, very pleasing background. Half of this is just about having fun. Here's another one where I rolled color on, just using a diagonal. This one was a little bit different. I have a sheet of glass which I love to work on, and I had been working with something else where I had left over silver paint. So I just splashed that onto the glass and I put some wallpaper paste, then pressed my card down, and I don't know if you can see that there's a face there waiting to be drawn onto. A bit of detail, a mouth with some eyes and the border. I've just got to decide when I'm going to do that, but right now I don't have the time. This one was rather fun to do. This one, I had bought a bunch of celery and simply cut the bottom off. So I had the base, which was joined with that little part where the roots go down, and I simply put on some of my paste grain onto that and used that to print. Because the celery is obviously not so easy to cut 100% smoothly, you will have slightly lighter and darker effects, but I quite enjoy that. And I think it would be lovely to do as a background for a wrapping paper if you were going to make it. If you have a big fat round brush and you put on lots of paint and you put your brush down at 90 degrees and just twist it, you can create these nice circles. And doing this with craft paint alone is really difficult because the paint reaches a certain point and then it wants to stop spreading because it starts soaking into your paper. But once you've got the wallpaper paste in, so you've got your paste grain mixed up, it's much easier to do. These are some examples of rather fun ones to do. If you are a card maker and you have a lot of stamps at home, you can put color down onto your card and then using your stamp into the wet paint and lift up the color. But you must make sure that you wipe that color off before you do it the next time. Otherwise, you're going to just be printing back color onto your card. So I rather like those, rather nice and delicate. Here's another example of a heart design. Very intricate detail, which would be very difficult to stamp with a paste grain because it would get in between the grooves of your stamp. But in this instance, because I'm lifting the paint off, it's much easier to do. Here's another one where I used little stars. I've chosen mostly dark backgrounds that I've done so that you can see them easily on camera. But you can see there are three different examples of that star pattern. And again, this was just a card stamp, so the design is beautifully delicate. This was a big foam stamp that I had, and here again I've applied color, and then I've put on my dry stamp and lifted up the paint, then wiped it and repeated again. So in this particular instance, wiping it off makes a big difference. I quite like the fact that as I pulled up some of the color, it created this sort of like almost veined effect on the petals. Just adds a bit of interest to it. And remember, when you're doing these things, not every print is going to be perfect. This was using the same stamp, but now putting paint onto the stamp and applying that onto my card. And I did stamp getting lighter and lighter so that I created a different background. For this particular one, I simply applied my paste grain colors, where you can see I've got two different colors here, a red and a yellow, and mixing up to make orange. And I put that onto one of those little foam sponges that you get in a medicine bottle. It was a little round one. Managed to pull it out and do a few prints with that. Like the textures that I've got there. These two pieces here, I put color down and then I pressed bubble wrap into it. And you can see it is quite a delicate design, but it does give quite a nice effect as you're working. The big thing is just play. You know, these two ones, I had some of that nylon mesh bag that we get onions and gem squash in here. And I laid that down flat on my card, and then I actually just rolled with a roller, paint going through. It wasn't completely successful, it was a bit smudgy here, but because I cut these up and do other projects, it doesn't really worry me. These ones were rather fun to do. These I used actual sheets of mosaic tiles, and I put my paste grain colors onto them and then printed with them. And I was very happy with those results. This was a foam stamp in a mosaic design that I applied paint onto the surface and then I printed with it. And you can see where your paint is slightly thicker, it's going to give you these sort of squishy marks as they come up. If I was to make a card perhaps and cut these out, they almost look like little bits of seaweed as individual things. So one could play with that with shells perhaps. This was using that same stamp, but in this particular instance, I applied the paint to my card and then I put the dry stamp down and I actually lifted up the color. And you can see that it is quite a different effect because you're not getting the white in between, you've got color in between. This one I applied paint using a nice firm bristle brush, pretty similar to what I'd done here when I was doing this kind of texture. But because the paint stays wet for longer, or as you say in artistic terms, it stays open, it doesn't dry as quickly, you can use something like a little sucker stick or the back of a spatula or a paintbrush and scratch patterns in. The beauty is if you don't like the patterns that you've made, you simply brush over it and do something else. And in this particular one here, I've also scratched designs in, but in this one I've actually just used one of those big afro combs to do that. And this one I just used a very large fairly bubbly kind of bath sponge, and I put paint on there and I just dabbed that down. There are so many things that you can do with paste grain papers, and it is such a lot of fun to do. If you do have the time, please do try. I do have a series of videos which I keep posting because I've made a lot of them on the various ways to do the individual techniques, and that will be start to finish, you know, perhaps how to do this particular technique where you're doing it with a card stamp. So please have a look on my playlists and you'll find individual instructions. But one of my followers did ask for me to just do a walk through some of the paste grain papers. This is not by any means all of them, it's just some examples. And I really do hope you have fun because it's such an exciting medium to play with. Thanks for joining me today. Bye-bye.